Hey everybody, the big question coming in has been how do I trim my flowering shrubs? And to start that off, we want to make sure that we're trimming them at the right time. And the general rule is with a flowering shrub, you trim them after they're done blooming. So that's very important with our spring bloomers that we don't trim them now in the fall or in the winter. We wait until after they're done blooming in the spring or in early summer. So that includes your lilacs, magnolia, azalea, rhododendrons, and your viburnum snowball bushes. And sometimes people get viburnum snowball bushes confused with hydrangeas though. So make sure you know which one you have. The viburnum is the one that blooms only in the springtime and it has the old-fashioned snowball flowers on them. So the reason why we do that is because these spring bloomers send up their new shoots or their new blooms for the next year right about now. So I'm going to show you on a lilac exactly what I mean. So on this lilac, you can see the new growth that's come up, and on that new growth is all the new buds, and those are going to be what form the flowers next year. So it's very important that you don't trim those off. If I cut those off this fall, I will not have flowers on this lilac next spring. So it's very important that you know which plants get trimmed now versus in the spring, and it's more important with those spring ones. Now when it comes to some of your other plants like say spirea, potentilla like I have here, and barberries, those can be trimmed now without a problem. Sometimes people say with a spirea it's better to do it more in the summer, but a lot of these new varieties bloom right until now, so you're going to be just fine with that. And so let me show you exactly how I trim these. Now the tools of the trade are usually your snips, you can use garden shears and a hedger in some cases, and also it's a good idea to have a pair of gloves, especially if you're trimming roses or barberries, because they have thorns that will guarantee to stick you and cause you some discomfort. The first thing I usually do is I look at my shrubs and I look for any kind of dead branches or branches that are growing out of proportion with the rest of the plant, and that's pretty clear on this weigela behind me. So I'm going to show you exactly how I trim that back. So one of the first things I notice is where it was trimmed last year, and usually when you look at that you can see wherever it was trimmed, new branches formed from that spot. So that's always good to know, and also it lets you know like it is okay for me to trim this. But if we look at this plant, not much big growth here, and then this kind of outrageous growth in the back, and I just want my plant to just be more consistent, and so I'm going to trim these back. So usually what I do, like with this one, I'm going to look to, I kind of want it into here, so I'm going to cut it just above those leaf sets, and then next year that's where it's going to branch. Now sometimes I might actually go a little lower because I want it a little fuller, so sometimes I go a little deeper. Then once I've kind of done the basics of that, now a lot of these would have come out if I used my hedgers or my shears, so I'm going to show you exactly how I do that. Now before you begin, be on the lookout for any plant tags or other items that might interfere with your trimming. It can also be helpful to put down a tarp, going to make it a lot easier when it comes time to clean up. I usually try to keep the hedger moving in a continuous motion rather than jabbing at the plant. You'll find that it's a much smoother cut. I also find oftentimes that if I start at the bottom of the plant and work my way up, I catch more branches. And make sure you're moving around the shrub so that you're getting a nice even trim. And this is an easy one to miss. Always be mindful of the location of the tip of your hedger, because you can get so focused on the plant that you might end up clipping the edge of another plant or something around you, and you don't want to do that. Now you can always go back in with your snips and fine tune your trimming. However, I don't worry about that too much because I know next season's growth is going to come shooting out of there, and it's going to hide any rough cuts or little wobbly places that I may have missed. I don't panic at all about it. I should also note that I might be trimming these more aggressively than I would if I had them planted out in the yard. That's because the plants are a little bit different in the two different environments. So when they're in the cans, I like to keep them a little tighter, partly because it makes it easier for the customer to manage if it's a smaller plant. I also want to make sure that it stays nice and full, and also the taller a plant gets, the more difficult it is to stand up when it's in the wind or when it's traveling. So overall for us, it just works better to keep it nice and tidy and tight. In your yard also, you're going to see it grow much more. So it's going to get a lot bigger, a lot faster than in these nursery cans. So it's, you're going to see those differences. Also, I should note that if you have some really established shrubs, so let's say you have shrubs that have been in there for 20 years and maybe you haven't even trimmed them in that time, and they're due for kind of a rejuvenation or a refreshing, I would not recommend doing that in the fall, or at least right now. I would wait until spring to do that, in part because you don't want any of that new growth to start being pushed out and then have frost get those tender leaves and hit them with that. It just isn't real good for the plant. Better to wait till springtime, when those buds are going to have a little bit more time to develop and become more established before the weather starts getting really extreme. If you have evergreens, those also, they usually say there's 2 times to do that. It's usually early spring and then kind of in the middle of summer, kind of. So if you have evergreens, probably don't do those now either too. There are a lot of videos out there on how to prune specific plants, and I would recommend you watch those if you have any questions, because I'm definitely not an expert. I'm only speaking from our experience and what we do here. So it can kind of vary a lot based on different varieties. And also, I should note that a lot of people say, hey, don't do any trimming in fall. And in our area, it's not as big a deal. They usually say don't do that because of that same risk of the frost. Now we are going to get frost. We've already had frost once this year and it came really late, and we are going to be having frosty nights kind of nonstop for quite a while. So we don't have to worry about that here. Whereas in other places, they might not get hard frost until December. So if you trim now, you're going to get that new growth and it's going to get hit with the frost, and it's going to stress out the plant, and it's going to use up a lot of energy that it really needed to conserve. So we're a little different because we're a little farther north and it's a lot cooler here than, say, people even downstate, but farther south especially. So those are my tips. I'm trying to think if I have any other bits that I could tell you. Just good luck, everybody. If you have questions, feel free to send them our way. And if you don't know what kind of plant you have, it is a good idea to identify it first, because you don't want to trim off those spring bloomers because you will lose all that. I should also mention there's other viburnums other than the common snowball, and it's a catch-22 on if you want to trim those now or if you want to do them after they flower. The downfall with trimming them after they flower is that you don't end up with sometimes the berries and that kind of thing. Whereas if you trim them now, we still get flowers on a lot of ours when we trim our viburnum. And I'm not talking about snowball bushes. I'm talking about all the other viburnums. And there's over 100 different varieties of viburnums. So there's a lot out there. But anyway, so that's one that you can do it either way. But again, snowball bushes, those I probably wouldn't trim at all right now, because the only reason you really get those is because you want those beautiful flowers. So there you go. Oh gosh, I hope I've given you some information that's helpful. So good luck, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.